Lori. Okay, I see more people popping in now. I've just asked everyone to, if you have a moment, to put your name in the chat, say hello, where you're from, and if you have any specific questions you're trying to answer with this session today. There will be an opportunity for Q&A later, and I encourage you to put formal questions into the Q&A portion of the module here. But for now, just send us a note, say hi. We will be getting started in a moment. I respect that, Matt. As a journalist, that's what I do every day. Learn stuff that's new. All right, I'm going to just start talking. As people pour in, I'm just going to set up our session here and get right down to it because we don't have that much time. We are in the home stretch of this wonderful Verge Net Zero conference. I am Heather Clancy. I'm the editorial director at GreenBiz. I spend a lot of time writing about carbon removal and carbon technology. And Taylor's nodding because he's been the subject of my stories in the past. But this session is one that really intrigued me when Jim asked me to take it on, because it's the concept of building net zero into an operational model, into a product, and really thinking about that from the beginning or as part of a re-engineering process. So you have officially joined the Native Net Zero Integrating Emissions Goals into Products session today. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm Heather Clancy. I'll be your moderator. And we're going to explore how companies are integrating emissions reduction strategies into their products and business models. We have a really terrific set of panelists here today. They're going to answer my questions and yours, starting with Stacy Kauk, Director of Sustainability Fund for Shopify, Sandra Noonan, Chief Sustainability Officer with Just Salad, and Taylor Francis, the co-founder of Watershed. And I'm just going to make a note. I think you probably know the first two companies on that list. You've heard of them in the past. Watershed is an organization that actually GreenBiz is working with on their net zero strategy. So I just want to give a little shout out on that one and just disclose that right up front. Yeah, we're trying to do it ourselves. We got to, we're eating our dog food and we're thinking a lot more about how we do this ourselves. We don't just convene you folks, we're trying to do it as well. So to get us started, as I mentioned when we first jumped on, if you are joining us in the session today, just a couple of housekeeping things. One is that if you have some comments you'd like to make, feel free to put them into the chat. If you have questions, put them over in the Q&A tab so that I can triage those and get to them as well. I will be taking questions along the way. So if I see questions relevant to a topic of conversation, I'll pull it in. At the end of the session, I'm going to ask you to take our poll. We will have a survey feedback thing that'll pop up there towards the end, and I'll remind you about that later. But meanwhile, to get us started with the conversation, I asked each of the panelists today to think about what, quote, native net zero means for their business. I asked them to think about it along two realms. One is how this mindset is shaping operational processes internally, such as like supplier decisions, procurement choices, and so forth, as well as how you could come out with a product that could help others, right? So how you could develop a product that could help consumers or B2B business customers or business partners move toward net zero status. So to get us started, I'd love to call on Stacy to give us some opening comments on that question. Floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Heather, and it's great to be here with Sandra and Taylor. Thanks so much for having me. So before I dive into what native net zero means for Shopify, I'll just provide a bit of background. So Shopify is a leading global commerce company. We provide trusted tools to start, grow, market, and manage a retail business of any size. Currently, we have over 1.7 million merchants on our platform in 175 countries, and we have over 7,000 employees worldwide. Now, what does native net zero mean to Shopify? And really, it means considering the climate impacts of our operations, as well as the impacts of the use of our products and services. And for us, climate cannot be an afterthought, and it needs to be baked into decision-making and product development, both of which need to be done at the same time. So first, I'll talk a little bit about our operations. And so Shopify is already a carbon neutral company, and we've addressed our historical emissions. And when we made this commitment, we looked at our emissions profile and identified actions we were already taking, and also additional levers with a high likelihood of providing an opportunity for us to reduce our emissions even further. For example, our offices and data centers are powered by renewable energy. We also track carbon emissions from travel, and employees can actually see the impact of their travel and flight choices. Since the pandemic began back in May 2020, Shopify announced that we're going to be a fully remote company. And since then, we've actually adopted employee home office emissions into our corporate carbon footprint. So from an operations perspective, it's always about thinking about climate as we make our decisions and as we move forward as a company. And then when it comes to products, Shopify has a mission of being a 100-year company. And when you think about a 100-year time frame, we know that there are bigger threats than when you think about the next 5 or 10 years. And so when we think about a 100-year time frame, we know that we need to take on climate change. And so when we think about products and baking climate action into products, the focus is on the parts of commerce that are common issues for our merchants, such as shipping and packaging. And we've developed product solutions in these areas, and we also support this with merchant education. And so some examples of products we've built, we have Shop Pay, which is our one-click checkout feature. It's an accelerated checkout. And it actually is one of the first carbon neutral ways to pay. And how it works is every time a customer places an order and checks out using Shop Pay, we automatically calculate and offset the delivery emissions from every single order. And we're supporting a blue carbon project that's restoring mangroves in Casamance, Senegal at no extra cost to our merchants or their shoppers. And that makes sure that as our product adoption increases, we're also taking responsibility for the potential climate impacts of our product. And we've actually designed in a mitigation approach. We also offer an offset app to our merchants. And what this allows them to do is they can install this in their store, and it's designed to help them minimize their environmental footprint affordably. And it's also quite easy for them to use. And another feature we have that supports these two tools is called Shopify Compass. And Shopify Compass is a suite of educational resources that are available to help entrepreneurs grow, and it gives them direct answers to their climate questions, lessons learned, and advice from the best minds in modern business. And within this suite of tools, we have a course on how to grow a social enterprise and how to conduct sustainable business. Now, to support our commitment in terms of considering climate in how we design our business operations and how we build our product, we recognize that for Shopify to have an effective climate strategy, we also need to back this up with purchasing high quality carbon offsets that allow us to address our unabatable emissions. And as a company that champions entrepreneurs, Shopify is investing in entrepreneurial breakthrough technologies and companies that will advance sustainability practices for all. And we do that because we established a $5 million sustainability fund. And this fund allows us to spend $5 million every year on the most promising solutions out there to help reverse climate change. And now this goes hand in hand with baking in a net zero mindset, because even if we all stopped emitting today and we got to zero, we still have gone too far, and we still need to remove previous emissions from the atmosphere. And the technologies and solutions that we need to do that need customers today in order to drive down prices and help these new technologies scale so that carbon removal is readily available and accessible to everyone. And so that's how Shopify is approaching this and taking a net zero mindset in our operations and products. And then we're also investing on an annual basis through our sustainability fund to make sure that the solutions we need to get to net zero and beyond are readily available.
Mm-hmm. I have one follow-up for you before we move on to Sandra, Stacy, and that's just understanding that big amount of money you just mentioned that you're investing. How was that? How did you make the business case for that? How did the executive team get convinced that you needed to do this? Because it sounds like you're paying a lot of money to do this.
It is a lot of money, and it actually came out of the process where we were exploring becoming carbon neutral. We did that measurement, that estimate of our, historic emissions since our CEO launched his first website back in 2004. We got our number, and it was like, okay, great. Now we need to go out and buy that high quality carbon offset so that we can take responsibility for what we emitted. And this was back in 2019. And we started looking around, and a lot of the available projects pay other people to avoid their emissions. And it was like, well, no, we want to actually go get carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and put it away forever. And we want to buy that. And at the time, what was available, there's small quantities, super high prices. And so that led us to realize there's this, either a very immature market or almost a market failure happening. And so we decided that we needed to go and spend big and allow us to go buy those high quality carbon removals at whatever price the market was selling them at. So that's where that $5 million started at. And so we're in year 2 of our fund, and so much has changed since then. And it's quite an exciting space to be.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Just to note that I am seeing some of the questions going to chat. If you could put them in the Q&A, that would be better, but I am going to address them later. Specifically, Jim Davis, I'll park your question for a little bit later. First, we're going to hear, we're going to hear from our other 2 panelists, and starting with Sandra.
Hi, everyone. So with Just Salad, the way we think about native net zero is through the customer experience of eating your lunch every day. So Just Salad is a restaurant chain founded in 2006. It operates across 6 U.S. states currently. And the way I joined Just Salad is relevant to this topic. So back in 2019, I was trying to become a zero waste individual. I wanted to reduce my resource footprint across my own lifestyle, meaning putting as little into the trash can as possible, really adopting a circular lifestyle where that we really refer to as zero waste in our circles. And I discovered Just Salad, and I'll go off camera for a second to show you my picture, because I discovered their reusable bowl program. So in this picture, I'm holding the Just Salad reusable bowl. This is a polypropylene bowl that lasts over hundreds of uses, and you buy it at Just Salad for $1, and every time you come back you get a free topping as a thank you for foregoing single-use waste food containers. I was really captivated by this program, so much so that I started eating lunch exclusively at Just Salad whenever I was on the go and eating at a fast casual restaurant. Just Salad was my choice, and literally started carrying this bowl pretty much everywhere with me in case I was going to stop in to one of the many Just Salad locations in New York City where I eat. That love affair with the company led me to ultimately joining as its chief sustainability officer. And this is one of the ways in which the reusable bowl program, which has been functioning since 2006, so for 15 years, is one of the ways in which we try to empower the customer to really adopt a paradigm shift in how they think about eating on the go, and to approach it as something that can be very not resource neutral, but much lighter resource footprint than the current cultural paradigm around fast casual eating. So the Reusable Bowl program is our take on circular on-the-go eating, and we are trying to extend that to digital ordering so that one day you'll order online, you'll be able to get it in a reusable Just Salad bowl, bring it back to Just Salad, drop it off. We take care of the washing and sanitation. And that is being piloted at 2 stores currently. So we think this is a major emerging trend in the fast casual restaurant space. We're seeing other major chains trialing similar things like Starbucks, McDonald's. Another, this is where I will pause, but another way that we try to empower the customer to think about eating in a climate-friendly, climate-neutral way is through carbon labeling. So the average American diet is about 4.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent daily, according to our research. And that's the carbon footprint. And we'd have to reduce that by half to get the carbon footprint of our food system within planetary boundaries. So we're way too high. It's like we're consuming too many calories. Think about we're consuming too much carbon. And so Just Salad's carbon footprint on average for each menu item is about 0.8 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent, much, much lower, right? So we've carbon labeled our menu as an experiment. We approach this with great humility. Carbon labeling is difficult, and we're in the very early stages of carbon labeling, but when you walk into a Just Salad, you will see little earth globes with the associated carbon footprint of every menu item. And we are partnering with universities to study the impact of these labels on consumer behavior, much like the calorie and nutrition label introduced in the 90s, which also affected consumer behavior around food purchases. So I'll pause there and happy to dig into all of that later on.
Perfect. Thank you. You didn't tell me that story before. That is great. I love that story. I have one quick follow-up before we go over to Taylor. And just how much more expensive was the bowl? Like, maybe you don't know because you weren't there yet, but like that decision, how was that decision supported?
On a financial basis, Heather, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So the Just Salad reusable bowl costs $1 to purchase, as I mentioned. And for Just Salad, the reusable bowl is basically cost neutral. It's cost neutral to us because we don't make money selling you these bowls. We don't lose money, generally speaking, even though we're giving you free food as a reward, because we are offsetting that cost by not providing you with the disposable container, which is a major expense for every restaurant. So on average, it's a cost neutral program.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm glad I asked. So plenty to dig into for both of you, but first we're going to go to Taylor for some introductory remarks.
Yeah, so excited to be here. This is a topic that's very near and dear to our heart at Watershed. Watershed is a software platform to help companies get to net zero. And we're lucky to work with Stacy, Heather and the GreenBiz team and other teams at Airbnb, DoorDash, Square, Stripe, Sweetgreen, and others to basically measure their carbon emissions today, come up with a plan for reducing emissions over time, actually execute on that plan, remove whatever carbon remains, and then report on progress. And our view is that there's kind of too much activity out there around looking at your carbon graph and reporting it in a glossy brochure or glossy PDF, and not enough around actually bending your carbon graph by taking action. And so that's our whole mission, is to work with the companies that are bending their carbon graph and make that possible. And in our view, net zero is not just an accounting exercise. In some ways it is that, and we've got a lot of opinions on what kind of true net zero means, but I think it's about much more than just getting your corporate carbon balance sheet to zero. It's an imperative for a company to basically flex its muscle however it can to help the whole world get to net zero. And I think that's my excitement around this idea of native net zero, is that I think that it puts the emphasis on how companies can use whatever tools are at their disposal to help the whole world get to zero faster. And so what I'm seeing is that there's kind of two buckets of these native net zero strategies. One is around designing or redesigning your operations, your product, your business in a zero carbon way from the beginning. Think about Just Salad carbon labeling its menu, Sweetgreen trying to source low carbon ingredients. Think about Square, who we work with, designing card readers and payment terminals in a low carbon way. They're following on a decade of awesome leadership from Apple that literally designs every single device in our pockets, thinking about the carbon impact of every material. So I think that's this kind of first strategy of native net zero, is embed carbon into the decisions you make about your products. And then I think the second strategy is enabling your customers to take action. So many companies have as much or maybe more leverage when you think about all of their customers' impact on the planet. So Shopify is an awesome example of this with Shop Pay. Stripe is also trying to sit between merchants and consumers and redirect funding towards carbon removal by being at that moment where the money changes hands. Booked my first post-COVID flight recently, and it's great to see Google Flights showing you the carbon impact of every flight that you're choosing between. And so I just think there's an enormous amount of opportunity for companies to think through, what can we do in our product that lowers the carbon of all of our customers in our ecosystem? And so I'm hopeful that kind of this movement will help to shift climate from being kind of a bolt-on afterthought, put it in the once-a-year sustainability PDF, to built into how companies actually run their business and build their products.
So thank you for your initial comments. I actually want to ask a question that I want Stacy to and Sandra to answer in a moment. But Taylor, how important is it that you actually have a net zero declaration to exemplify this mindset?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most exciting things that's happened in the last year and a half, is that net zero has become kind of the new standard for companies. And it's awesome to see companies make those commitments. I think the thing that's really important is to kind of shift into taking real action on climate fast. And so for companies that make net zero commitments, it's our view that it's really important that those commitments have integrity and teeth, and that they not just be a kind of new marketing veneer over traditional offset programs. And in our view, kind of net zero is about encompass your entire emissions, including all of scope 3, reduce emissions as much as possible, and then for whatever remains, fund genuine carbon removal, not just avoided emissions projects. And Stacy can talk more about the depth that they've gone into there. So I think if you're going to make a net zero commitment, make sure it has teeth. The most important thing that matters a lot more than your press release is, what are you actually doing? In some ways, I wish we asked companies more about, what have you done this year? What carbon impact did it have? Put a number against that. That's what really matters.
So to Sandra and Stacy, do your companies have a net zero commitment? And if so, like, if not, why? And if so, like, how did that come about? So Stacy, can we start with you?
Sure. So yes, in fact, Shopify does not have a net zero commitment. However, we do have a commitment to measure and reduce our operational footprint. That's one of the things that Taylor touched on. Like, we do work with Watershed. We have full visibility on our scope 1, scope 2, and a complete picture of our scope 3 emissions. And what that data informed approach allows us to do is bake in strategies that reduce those emissions over time, because you can spend a lot of time coming up with a roadmap and a plan and picking a date and all of that. And we've decided to really focus in on reducing those emissions where we can. And one thing to think about when we look at Shopify, we're a software as a service company. To put it in perspective, in our 2020 sustainability report, our annual emissions from our corporate footprint, which is scope 1, scope 2, and travel, was below 5,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Like, it's quite small. We've done a lot of things in the past to reduce our emissions, like sourcing renewable energy for all of our offices and data centers. And so, one of the things to keep in mind is when you've done the reductions that you've been able to do with your companies within your area of influence, you're kind of waiting for the electricity grid to decarbonize. You're kind of waiting for clean fuels to get in those airplanes that we fly on, right? And so that's where our sustainability fund comes in, where we're spending $5 million every year on the most promising solutions that then contribute to decarbonizing electricity grid. We're talking to carriers and suppliers about how can we accelerate decarbonization in the shipping space. So these are the ways that we're focused on taking action so that we're not doing that accounting exercise. We're actually trying to jump ahead and make sure that the solutions we need get the support now, so that when we've done as much as we can in terms of reductions, those solutions are now developed at scale, economically feasible, and available for everyone to access. So we're doing sort of an end run on carbon removal while still making sure our house is in order.
And Sandra.
I do think commitments are important for us, and I think that they're important because they galvanize our team, and they also galvanize our suppliers. So where we are with it is we've completed a greenhouse gas inventory of our company. The next step for us is to formulate a disclosure and reduction strategy. So we'll be disclosing our emissions and identifying where we can reduce and areas where we can act immediately, and quantifying the reduction potential of those actions. We have not made a net zero commitment yet, and I can speak to some of the challenges of that. I think Stacy was kind of alluding to this, but within the greenhouse gas particle framework, for sure, the vast majority of our emissions are scope 3, related to product transport, getting food to our stores. And I think a theme of this Verge Net Zero conference, one of them has been the difficulties that SMEs, such as Just Salad, including Just Salad, have in exerting leverage over suppliers to decarbonize. And so to say we can go net zero today, I'm not able to say that right this second. I think that would require a lot of leverage and collaboration with suppliers that we just haven't achieved yet. So barring that, we will look at going carbon neutral, certainly, and offsetting what we simply cannot reduce as a company of our size right now. So that's very frankly where we are in our journey, and I'm really excited to accelerate that journey. And it's going to take a lot of work, and probably restaurants of our size collaborating in some way to accelerate things.
Thank you for that frankness. I appreciate it. I'm curious. Your customers are different, Stacy, in that you're dealing with merchants, right? Business, like Sandra's got consumers buying into the strategy. You've got all of these merchants. You have particular, like, how are you getting them engaged? She just spoke about the challenges of her suppliers. How are you getting your merchants engaged?
So one of the beauties of Shopify and our platform is that we're the entrepreneurship company. It's very affordable, very accessible, and anyone can do it from anywhere. And you have to apply that same mentality to sustainability and to climate action when you think about it from a merchant's perspective. And it's similar to what Sandra was mentioning, where you need to focus on getting the building blocks in place. And when I think about Shopify's over 1.7 million merchants, they're SMEs. A large part of them are SMEs, right? Some of them are just starting their first business ever. It's their side hustle. It's a single mom in the basement on the weekends. They want to take climate action. They want to be sustainable, but really they need to focus on their business, and they may not have the resources and expertise to do so. And so that's the beauty of the opportunity with Shopify's platform and our sustainability fund, is that we can take our expertise and give our merchants superpowers by making sure that, you know, if they do install the Offset app and they've decided they're going to address their shipping emissions, they're getting a high quality offset vetted by us, as well as leading scientific experts in the field. So they know that they can trust us to deliver a solution that is of a high quality. And at the same time, it's easy and affordable to them because we're able to aggregate all these small businesses together. And that's one way that we can actually dig into our supply chain, right? If we think about that opportunity to influence our major suppliers and carriers, we have that access point, and then our merchants are able to benefit from that aggregation that takes place on our platform.
Just want to jump in to underscore what Stacy just said. I think part of what is so exciting, if we take advantage of it, about this mindset shift towards net zero as the objective for climate, is that it really puts the emphasis on ecosystems taking action. You know, in kind of a carbon neutral world, you figure out your scope 1 and 2 emissions, you buy some offsets, you check the box, you're done. In a net zero world, the math of getting to true zero across your entire footprint is really hard unless everyone else around you gets there too. And just think about all the different ecosystems Sandra and Stacy have just talked about. You know, Shopify with carriers, Shopify with merchants, Just Salad with suppliers. And I mean, this is true across every single company. Every single company is part of a carbon ecosystem. And so I'm just really excited about, you know, what we can enable as companies, as enablers, as infrastructure providers, as a community, around shifting from this, let me look inward at my own carbon picture, to let me look outward at the ecosystem, and what is the thing I can do to increase the incentive of the ecosystem to act, like Sandra mentioned, around, you know, sending a message to suppliers, or lowering the friction of the ecosystem to act, like Stacy mentioned, around making it easier for Shopify merchants.
Right. You know, and these ecosystems, especially in the case of these two organizations here, are growing quickly, and your companies are growing quickly. So another place I'd like to go is as you think about rapid growth, how do you plan for that? So like, what are things that companies can do now that could make this easier, like as you do get larger? And Taylor, actually would love to start with you on this one.
Yeah, it's such a good question. Two quick thoughts on this. Number one, I think, you know, the imperative is just to set your company up on a low carbon trajectory from the beginning. It's a heck of a lot easier to make the right choice around suppliers, infrastructure providers, around a low carbon hybrid workplace, around clean power for your office and your remote workers when you're small, than it is to make a big phase shift when you're a large organization. The other thought, you know, and a lot of Watershed's customers are growing really quickly. You think about Shopify, Airbnb, DoorDash, Stripe. These are, you know, companies that have scaled really rapidly in the last couple of years. I think another interesting reflection there is that a lot of the standards that the whole sustainability world has embraced over the last decade don't quite work that well for fast-growing companies. And I think we need to figure out a way to have net zero standards that accept that it's actually a really great thing if a company that starts out small with a low carbon footprint grows really rapidly. Its absolute emissions might increase significantly, but there's going to be less carbon in the world emitted because they're taking market share from dirtier companies. And so I think we do have there's some work to do when you think about standards and accounting and this sort of thing to kind of accommodate a world of high growth, low carbon businesses.
Sandra.
Yeah, as we grow, and we're planning on doubling in size over the next couple of years, I think that you want to consider a few things to set yourself up for that trajectory, or put yourself on a trajectory that Taylor mentioned. net zero is about measuring, disclosing, committing, and reducing. And so taking those one by one, like measurement, simple logistical things like making data collection, data integrity part of your systems and your infrastructure. Like I've been on calls with our accounting team where we're talking about employee travel. When you expense travel, like we need to know what city you travel to so we can calculate your miles. These are not things that a company might be thinking about if they're not considering carbon net zero, right? So another example, when we change a refrigerant at one of our stores in our HVAC systems, what gas are we using to change when we change the refrigerant? Like those things are part of your emissions calculations. And literally one of your tech provider, your technicians might provide that information they're invoicing and another might not. So like making that part of your invoicing requirements, really unglamorous data related things are like a very good place to start. I could go on, but just measurement, get yourself ready to measure. It would be my advice.
And Stacy.
To build off that, it's so important to have the data and to be set up, to have that infrastructure set up, because it can take so much time to get the data points that you need to figure out where you do have opportunities for reductions. And to go on a little bit more about the data, even once you have the opportunity, once you have a full picture, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, is you're able to be nimble. You can, as your business pivots, changes, evolves, and grows over time, if you have that solid data set, I can reach out to whatever team within Shopify and go, oh, you're working on this. I have all this climate data right here. And, now you can consider this in your decision-making process. And I mean, I think back to 2020 when Shopify decided to go fully remote. I mean, Taylor and I had a phone call where I was like, Taylor, what do I do? What does this mean? And, it was just shifting that entire mentality of, I have all the electricity bills and all the natural gas bills from all of our offices. It's really easy to do all of my little calculations. But then it was like, oh no, everyone's at home in their houses around the world on different electricity grids. And like, it just exploded the whole problem. And so because we are able to get our data organized and to have all of that information now readily available as things start to happen and we're opening back up and travel's increasing, we're able to use that data to incentivize decision making. And that's where things get exciting, because if you can use your climate data to incentivize the low carbon decision and it's actually present in the risk analysis of what you're deciding to do and build for your company, that's where you have net zero baked in. And if you're behaving like that, like an organism, as you grow, your emissions will not. You'll have that decreasing carbon intensity and that increasing revenue. And that's really what every company should shoot for during the growth phase.
Like great points. You've mentioned, this is kind of, you both just gave operational examples. What about developing new products? Like how do we put this sensibility into the new things? I know that you spoke to some specific examples a moment ago, Stacy. I'm just wondering, Taylor, from other companies' perspective, have you seen people building that into their product development and design mode? And if not, why is this important to do?
I think Stacy just said exactly the right thing, which is the whole key here is to get the carbon data to the moment where the decision's being made. And if you think about that in the product, in the context of building products, physical products, there's basically two categories of choices that really matter from a carbon perspective. How are you designing the product? What material is going in that electronics device? What ingredients are going in that meal? We work with Square, which produces Square card readers and payment terminals, and they are thinking through every single material that goes into a Square hardware device from the perspective of how carbon intensive is this material? How much are we using? What alternatives exist? And then the other big decision you have is where are we going to source this material? And there's a huge difference in the carbon intensity of different materials depending on what energy source is being used by the supplier. In the context of food, Just Salad's doing this work in a really awesome way. We work with Sweetgreen, which is carbon footprinting all of their key suppliers with an eye on the carbon intensity of different choices actually at the field. And I can tell you there's a really big difference in the carbon intensity of cheese depending on what happens to the manure. And that's a thing that, if you were running a food supply chain, you should make decisions about who you source from with an eye on that. So yeah, I think kind of new products in many ways are the best moment of leverage. And the two levers there to think about are how are we making this product, and then what suppliers and partners are we working with for those pieces.
Yeah, and I know, Sandra, thank you, Taylor. I know you had a specific example of how this shapes menu choices. So can you poke into that a little bit?
Sure. When we are developing a new menu item, I think that our carbon labeling exercise helps us in a couple of ways. First, we are thinking about the carbon footprint, the total carbon emissions of every ingredient in that item. It's going to be a salad, most likely. And we really don't want it to go above a certain threshold because we've already calculated the average emissions of our menu. We really don't want to go outside that range. We want to hold ourselves to a lower carbon footprint threshold than our highest item. And so that means that we're developing salads that are balanced in their combination of dairy or protein and keeping within a range. It also helps us with suppliers. If we very visibly have carbon labeled our menu, we will say to them, we really need to know more about where your ingredients are coming from. If it's a processed ingredient, such as like a plant-based meat, for example, there's some processing in that ingredient. Where are your processed items? Where are you processing? It gives us more transparency into the item because we have to carbon label that item, or we have to carbon footprint that item. So our suppliers kind of have to respect that. And so, yeah, it's interesting. It's a journey, and that's what we've observed so far with it.
I'm looking through here at some of astonishingly, we have 4 minutes left, which is crazy. I want to keep talking. But let me just triage a couple of these really specific questions. There's one for you, Stacy. How do reverse logistics and returns factor into your net zero operations strategy?
That's a great question. So what we have on Shopify, how the business functions is, it's a monthly fee that our merchants pay in general to have access to the software and the tools. And then they can add features to their store that allow them to do quick returns. It allows them to print shipping labels that have selected preferred carriers. We have all sorts of different customizations that our merchants have access to that they can add to their store. And there are several different options for returns on our platform, but really it needs to go one step higher than returns because it's about not having a return. So it's about making sure that your customers get the right fit in the jeans they just bought. And so that's where we try to focus on developing new tools and systems for our merchants to help them in that area. Like we have a very exciting augmented reality team at Shopify that really is all about, well, what would that table look like in my living room, right? And so you can drop that table, you can use your phone, you're shopping, you drop that table into your virtual living room through your phone's viewfinder and you go, oh yeah, it's perfect, it's gonna work, it's gonna look great. And then you don't have a return. So that's how we're thinking about things in those areas. It's those technological solutions that are really going to reduce emissions in the long run.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to make one housekeeping announcement, and then I'm going to go to a last question for everyone because we're unfortunately not supposed to go over, sadly. The housekeeping announcement is just that there's a poll pinned at the top of the chat for surveys for feedback for this session. And the last question I'm going to ask everyone to consider is how a focus on native net zero can become a competitive differentiator. So with customers, with employees, like new potential talent, with potential suppliers, right? How can this become a competitive differentiator? And how do you balance the trade-offs between that and other growth considerations? Like go back to the growth question. So Taylor, I'm going to actually put you on the spot first, if you don't mind. Go right ahead.
My quick thought here is I think we actually have a fairly narrow window of time in the next couple of years where net zero is going to become an imperative for every company in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years. And the next couple of years are the window in which companies can get a head start and be a leader. And I think investors expect it. Employees are making choices around working at companies based on a pretty, high stakes view of how ambitious their climate programs are. And consumers are increasingly making every choice in their lives with an eye on climate. So I think the next couple of years are the big opportunity for companies to be leaders on this before it becomes an imperative for every business.
Stacy, you're next.
Yeah, I can echo quite a few of the sentiments Taylor's bringing up. I mean, when we look at our merchants and their buyers, we find that there's this need to vote with your wallet, right? You want to buy from brands that reflect your values. And if we have these sustainable features for our merchants to use them on Shopify, they're going to have more customers that identify with the way that they're building their brand. And we see that time and again that customers want to vote with their wallets, and the money's going to go to the brands that resonate with their values. And especially as we look at demographics and we get to the younger generations, that percentage increases exponentially. And as those folks continue to vote with their wallets, like Taylor says, it's going to be an imperative. And it's not just going to be a corporate imperative from an investor perspective. It's going to be an imperative from the bottom up, from the consumer themselves. So that's what we're building towards.
Last word, Sandra.
The data speak for themselves. On top of what Taylor and Stacy said, just to drill down, in the food space, 51% of Americans said they would eat a more climate-friendly diet if they had more information about the environmental impacts of their food choices. That's according to the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication. That's over half of Americans. I think it's going to grow. So we are not thinking too hard or long about competitive advantage. We see it in the data already.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this great conversation. You guys are all so terrific and inspiring. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank everyone for joining us today. Sandra, Stacy, and Taylor, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Heather.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.